Let me start with a simple truth. When diplomats say the talks went well, that doesn't mean the crisis is over. More often, it means the real confrontation has just begun. Because behind closed doors, when the cameras are off and the microphones are muted, words like progress and optimism are often used to buy time, not to signal trust. And right now, time is the most dangerous currency in the world. Tonight, we're talking about the US-Iran negotiations. But what we're really talking about is power, fear, leverage, and the thin line between diplomacy and war. This is not just another round of talks. This is not just another press conference. This is a moment that could quietly determine whether the Middle East steps back from the edge or slips closer to a confrontation no one can fully control. Let's set the scene. Just hours after U.S. officials described the latest meeting with Iran as productive and constructive, Tehran came out swinging. Iran's message was blunt: no ambiguity, no diplomatic poetry. They will not stop enriching nuclear fuel. That single statement erased weeks of carefully managed optimism, and it forced everyone, Washington, Jerusalem, Brussels, and the Gulf capitals, to confront the same uncomfortable question: what exactly are these talks meant to achieve? On American television, we saw Israeli Ambassador Danny Danon lay out Israel's position with brutal clarity. Israel, he said, does not seek war with Iran. No shared border, no territorial dispute. But Israel takes threats seriously, especially when those threats are paired with missiles, uranium enrichment, and a regional network of armed proxies. From Israel's perspective, this isn't theoretical. This is existential. And here's where history matters, because this standoff didn't begin last month. It didn't begin last year. It's the result of more than 4 decades of mistrust, broken promises, and strategic deception. Go back to 2015. The Iran nuclear deal, the JCPOA, was sold as a breakthrough. Limits on enrichment, inspections, transparency. In return, sanctions relief. For a while, the agreement held, at least on paper, but critics, especially in Israel, warned that it only delayed the problem, that it didn't dismantle Iran's nuclear capability, it merely paused it. And when the U.S. withdrew from the deal in 2018, that fragile structure collapsed. Iran gradually resumed enrichment, then accelerated it. Higher purity, faster centrifuges, less transparency, each step small enough to avoid immediate retaliation. But together, unmistakable. This wasn't a sprint to a bomb. It was a calculated walk toward the threshold. Now fast forward to today. Iran insists its nuclear program is peaceful. That enrichment is a sovereign right. Israel doesn't believe that. Neither do many in Washington, regardless of party. And here's the key point most headlines miss. This negotiation is not about trust. It's about deterrence. Each side is trying to convince the other that the cost of escalation will be unbearable, while avoiding escalation itself. That's the paradox. Listen carefully to Ambassador Danon's words. He didn't threaten war. He promised retaliation. That distinction matters. Israel's message is, we don't want this, but if forced, we are ready. High readiness, defensive and offensive. And when he says the next response would be much more painful than last summer's strikes, that's not rhetoric for television. That's signaling. In geopolitics, signaling is everything. Now let's talk about the United States. The White House says all options remain on the table, including military strikes. That's deliberate ambiguity, because the U.S. doesn't want war with Iran, but it also doesn't want Iran to believe war is off the table. At the same time, Washington is deeply aware of recent history. Iran rebuilt its ballistic missile capabilities faster than expected. Facilities were repaired, production resumed. Airstrikes slow programs. They rarely end them. And that's why the question being asked behind closed doors is far more uncomfortable than the one asked on TV. If military action can't permanently stop Iran's capabilities, what is the end game? This brings us to the most explosive idea raised in that interview: regime change, not whispered, said out loud. The belief, held by some in Israel and parts of the West, that a different government in Tehran would change everything. No nuclear race, no regional chaos, no threats to wipe nations off the map. But history offers a brutal warning here. Bombs don't install governments. Air power doesn't create legitimacy. In fact, military pressure often strengthens hardliners, especially in societies already scarred by sanctions and isolation. Even Ambassador Danon acknowledged the reality. Regime change by force is extremely difficult, so why bring it up? Because regime change doesn't have to come from missiles, it can come from within. And this is where the Iranian people enter the story. Over the past few years, Iran has seen massive protests. Women, students, workers, cities across the country chanting the same message: enough. Crackdowns followed, arrests, killings, silence. But the anger didn't disappear. From Israel's perspective, and from many in the West, the Iranian people are the wild card. The hope is not that bombs topple the regime, but that pressure creates cracks. That's why there's so much focus on sanctions, international isolation, and designating the IRGC. It's not just punishment, it's leverage. But leverage cuts both ways. Iran also has leverage through proxies, through oil markets, through regional instability. From Hezbollah in Lebanon to militias in Iraq to tensions in the Red Sea, Tehran doesn't need to fire a missile directly to raise the cost of confrontation. This is asymmetric warfare, and it's why every move is calculated, because a single miscalculation could spiral fast. Now let's widen the lens. This isn't just a US-Iran issue, and it's not just an Israel-Iran issue. This is about the credibility of diplomacy itself. If talks fail again, if enrichment continues unchecked, if threats escalate, then the lesson learned by the world is dangerous, that negotiations are a delay tactic, that power, not compromise, determines outcomes. And once that belief takes hold, restraint becomes optional. One more layer matters here: the timing. A confirmed meeting is scheduled for February 19th, the first gathering of the President's Board of Peace. Israel is on board, objections resolved. On the surface, this looks like progress, but beneath it lies a hard reality. You cannot rebuild Gaza while Hamas holds power. You cannot stabilize the region while Iran arms its proxies. And you cannot ask Israel to lower its guard while threats remain explicit. So the first discussions won't be about dreams. They'll be about disarmament, force, and removal. Uncomfortable words, but unavoidable ones. So where does that leave us right now? We are in a holding pattern. Diplomacy continues, but skepticism dominates. Military options exist, but no one wants to pull the trigger. Public statements project confidence, but private rooms are tense. This is not peace. This is managed danger. And history tells us something important about moments like this. They don't explode without warning. They erode, step by step, decision by decision, until suddenly there is no easy way back. All right, now let's go where the press conferences don't, because what you've heard so far, the statements, the interviews, the diplomatic language, that's only the surface. The real story lives underneath it. This is where interests collide. This is where allies quietly disagree. This is where decisions that never make headlines begin shaping the future. And this is where ordinary people, millions of them, get caught in the middle. Let's start with the biggest illusion surrounding these talks. The idea that this is only about nuclear enrichment. It isn't. That's the entry point, not the destination. What's actually being negotiated, implicitly, sometimes silently, is regional order. Who sets the rules in the Middle East? Who enforces red lines? And who pays the price when those lines are crossed? Behind the scenes, Washington is balancing three competing pressures. First, prevent Iran from reaching nuclear weapons capability. That's non-negotiable. Across parties, across administrations. Second, avoid another Middle East war. The American public is exhausted, politically, militarily, psychologically. Third, and this is rarely said out loud, maintain credibility. Because if the US draws red lines and doesn't enforce them, allies notice, and adversaries test harder. That credibility question looms over every sentence spoken in these talks. Now look at Israel's position behind closed doors. Publicly, Israeli leaders emphasize defense, deterrence, readiness. Privately, the fear is simpler and far more urgent: time. Every month that Iran enriches more uranium, every upgrade to centrifuges, every step closer to nuclear threshold status, Israel's margin for error shrinks. And here's the part many outside the region underestimate. For Israel, this is not about winning a war. It's about preventing an irreversible reality. Once Iran becomes a threshold nuclear state, even without a bomb, the rules change forever. Deterrence shifts. Proxy aggression becomes bolder. Regional arms races accelerate. Israel knows this, and so do Iran's strategists, which brings us to Tehran's real leverage. Iran doesn't need to win militarily. It only needs to make confrontation too costly. Through Hezbollah's arsenal in Lebanon, through militias in Iraq and Syria, through pressure on shipping lanes and energy routes. This is strategic depth, and it's why Iran can sit at negotiation tables while simultaneously fueling instability. From Tehran's perspective, that's not hypocrisy. That's leverage management. Now let's talk about the quiet disagreements inside the Western camp. Europe wants de-escalation, desperately. Energy markets are fragile. Inflation is politically toxic. Another Middle East conflict would ripple instantly into European streets. So European diplomats push for patience, more inspections, more dialogue. Israel hears delay. Washington hears caution. Iran hears opportunity. And then there's the Arab world. Gulf states publicly support diplomacy. Privately, they are watching closely. They don't want a nuclear Iran. They don't want war. And they don't fully trust either outcome. Some hedge by strengthening ties with Washington. Others quietly open channels with Tehran. This is a region preparing for uncertainty, not clarity. Now let's bring this down from capitals and conference rooms to real people. Because while leaders talk about deterrence and leverage, civilians live with consequences. In Iran, sanctions mean inflation, medicine shortages, unemployment. The people protesting in the streets are not chanting about uranium enrichment. They're chanting about dignity, about food prices, about freedom. And every time negotiations fail, hardliners tighten their grip and reformers lose oxygen. In Israel, families live under the constant awareness that escalation could come fast. Missiles don't give long warnings. Shelters are part of daily life. In Gaza, reconstruction is frozen because security questions remain unresolved. No rebuilding without disarmament, no disarmament without pressure, no pressure without risk. It's a cycle, and civilians are trapped inside it. So what happens next? Let's walk through 3 realistic scenarios, not predictions, but paths. Scenario 1, managed containment talks continue. Iran enriches, but stops short of crossing a clear red line. The U.S. avoids strikes. Israel holds back, watching closely. Sanctions remain. Tensions simmer. No breakthroughs, no explosions. This is the status quo, unstable, unsatisfying, but survivable. The danger? Complacency, because containment only works until it doesn't. Scenario 2, limited confrontation. A trigger event occurs, an attack by a proxy, a strike on shipping, a covert action exposed. Israel responds, precisely, forcefully. Iran retaliates indirectly. No full-scale war, but no pretending anymore. Markets react. Diplomacy freezes. The region tightens. This scenario is often described as controlled escalation. History suggests control is fragile. Scenario 3, strategic break negotiations collapse publicly. Iran accelerates enrichment openly. The threshold is crossed. At that point, restraint becomes riskier than action. Israel faces a decision it has tried to delay for years. The U.S. faces a choice it hoped to avoid. The Middle East enters a new era, not of immediate war, but permanent instability. Once crossed, there is no easy return. Now here's the hardest truth of all. Every side believes time is working for them. Iran believes patience brings leverage. Israel believes readiness buys security. The U.S. believes diplomacy prevents disaster. History warns us about moments like this. They are not decided by intentions. They are decided by miscalculations, by assumptions, by signals misread, by one side believing the other will blink first. And that brings us to the question no leader wants to answer on camera. What if nobody blinks? What if diplomacy delays but doesn't resolve? What if deterrence holds until one day it doesn't? What if ordinary people continue paying the price for strategies they never chose? Because this is no longer just about Iran's nuclear program. It's about whether the world still believes problems like this can be managed without catastrophe, or whether we are slowly drifting into an age where power speaks louder than negotiation, and restraint becomes the exception, not the rule. That's the moment we're living in right now. And the decisions being made quietly, urgently, will echo far longer than any press conference ever will. So the final question isn't whether these talks succeed or fail. The real question is this. When history looks back at this moment, will it say we stepped back from the edge, or that we mistook delay for control and learned too late what the cost would be?